non-stop service from Chicago to Atlanta. My name is Joseph. I will be
Got some theme music this time.
cabin crew. We ask that you please fasten your seatbelts and secure all baggage and leave
Yo, what's going on, family? Welcome to the Flights and Feelings YouTube channel. Today, I am discussing a video that I just saw recently on YouTube discussing, basically, it's the moral argument. And I've spoken about this briefly at different times on my channel here. And I think it's worth inquiry. The basic idea is that, man, without an objective moral giver, aka God, then we can make no judgments with any authority about whether or not something is good or evil. And usually this conversation ends up talking about the Holocaust. I'm not exactly sure why. I wonder what the moral argument, where it ended up usually leading to before the Holocaust, because after the Holocaust, that seems to be the most common thing. But this is a student that's talking to Charlie Kirk. I think it's like a sort of forum that's happening at a college campus. And I'll bring it right up, and I just want to address in real time some of the comments. And just put my cards on the table before we start. I am someone who's agnostic, and I am open to this idea that there is a God that gives a law, that there's a law that's written on the hearts of people. However, I don't think it's all that difficult to explain how we come up with morality in human existence without God. I think though someone may say their religious perspective gives an account for how we get moral or objective morality and what we can point to, my perspective is that seems to be just a convenience for the argument, rather than something that is demonstrative, that it doesn't actually demonstrate that God is real or that there is an objective law. It really just shows that it would be convenient, it would be helpful, it would be useful if we had that, but it doesn't necessarily show that we actually have it. So I'll pull this video up right now. Let's go. Here we go.
Hello. Yeah, so I've seen you talk a lot about objective morality. And my big question is, it feels like you can make good statements and bad statements without referencing some kind of moral book. So I can say something is good, right? I had a good day today. And it doesn't really feel like I need to reference religion for that. So can you explain to me why you think we need to have some kind of absolute standard for morality?
Excellent question. It's really good. If you say you have a good day, are you describing the experience you had, or was it morally a good day?
So yeah, it would be a good day. So I can narrow it down more, I guess. Or I can ask, I guess, a better question. So if I don't have religion, right? Let's say I am an atheist or something, and I were to go up to, I find two books. One's the Quran, and then one is the Bible. And I read both of them, and then I have a feeling of preference towards one or the other. That makes me feel like morality probably isn't objective, because I read two moral codes, I didn't have one before, and then I derived one after reading it.
But one is true.
Well, yeah, obviously you're going with the presupposition that one is true. But
so let's play this out. Not sorry to interrupt. If I'm on an island, and let's just demystify part of this, and there's the Bible, and then there's Lord of the Rings, and I end up believing in one of those, which is true.
Again, it doesn't demonstrate that the Bible is true. I guess the point that I think he's trying to get at here is that, well, yeah, we could have two different documents, but one of them is true and one of them is not. Well, that's a whole different discussion. Is the Bible true? And in what sense is it true? If it is it true in a literal sense, historical sense, in a mythological sense, in a metaphorical sense, in an archaeological? There are a lot of questions that come from that. But it doesn't prove anything.
What's true is just what corresponds with reality. We're talking about.
I agree. So which one has evidence, and when applied in the natural world, actually shows a flourishing people and society and a way to live? Because you would agree, at least 8 out of 10 of the 10 Commandments.
This also assumes this idea right here. Well, which one of them? Lord of the Rings obviously is a book that's actually written by a Christian author, so I don't even know if that's a great example of that. But the point being that, well, Christianity has brought about a lot of human flourishing. We could also say that it has brought about a lot of anti-human flourishing as well. So I don't know if that necessarily helps. Is it a net positive in some sort of scales, a net negative, net zero? Does it cancel each other out? I don't even know if that's relevant. The point is that it does good and it does bad. But on top of that, it also assumes that Christianity, in some sense, was kind of like Shawshank. You ever watch Shawshank Redemption? And it says that, man, Shawshank is the only one who crawled through a mile of shit and came out clean on the other side or something like that. Essentially, Christianity and Christians will like to propose that the religion of Christianity is something that somehow remained unscathed, untouched by the religious and philosophical values that surrounded it during its day that it was being completed. That goes for Old Testament Judaism as well, as if Judaism has no syncretism, as if it has not interacted with other religious values that is adopted and it's taken on. It has been an aggregator of philosophical and moral values. As this moral argument really only works is if somehow this moral is dropped down like the 10 tablets. I mean, the 10 commandments, the tablets of the 10 commandments that drop down from the sky, untouched by any other human opinion. Or a very plausible idea is that the moral values that the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament portray is something that evolved over time. And it's not to say that it's not true. It's not to say that it doesn't have true things to say, things that are helpful to human flourishing. But the argument is not as strong if we also see that the Bible has taken on colors from a lot of different perspectives, and it's been sort of aggregated into this library. Let's put it that way.
They're pretty good rules for life,
No,
right?
yeah,
No, of course,
100%.
yes.
No, but
So,
the
great.
thing that I'm talking about doesn't have to do with whether or not Christianity is good or bad, or whether
No,
I
that's
agree
not
with
what you're
most
saying, I
of. Yeah, it's just regarding like, one can be true, but even if one is true, it doesn't really feel like I'm influenced in terms of what I feel is good or bad, because obviously, there are people who are Muslim who have read, the Bible and still are more persuaded by Islam.
No, of course. I mean, you could be persuaded by anything, right? That doesn't. I believe that there is a transcendent way of living. I call that the Bible, right? And I believe it's the perfect catalog from creation to the end of the world. You don't have to agree with that. I'm talking strictly from a moral sense. So let's just ask a separate question,
You do have to agree with it, but let me hear him out.
which is, do you think people are naturally outside of religious teaching good or not so good?
This idea that people are either good or bad. Let me finish. Let me hear what he says.
The nature of humanity.
The nature. I wouldn't be comfortable making a statement about
That's
it.
fair enough, and I appreciate that. So we believe, as Christians or those in the space, human beings are pretty awful. Okay, that we're broken.
Yeah, so it's not to say that humans can't do bad or good, that humans are all good or all bad, but it seems like a lot of typical mainstream evangelical doctrine, especially when you start to get into the more Calvinistic spaces, that humanity is not just, doesn't just simply have proclivity to do bad things, but it is depraved. It is at its core hell-bent on doing hellish things, that it only wants to do selfish and really extremely bad things. And without religious law, people would do the most heinous things. This argument is not strong to me because people do heinous things under religious law for the sake of religious law, and people do very good things without religious law as well. So let me just hear him. Let me finish this out.
Sinful, that we fall short of the glory of God, and that we need to teach people how to be good. A common left-wing belief is that human beings are actually awesome and they're terrific, and the reason why things are not so good is because of capitalism or the patriarchy or feminism or whatever. So you're asking a question of, why do we need objective morality? Well, or what specifically?
Yeah, so not necessarily why we need objective morality, but you seem to be, because obviously I don't believe that it's a thing.
This is a pretty smart college student here, by the way. That's a great point, Treese, because I noticed that earlier, and I made a comment on the video itself. You're going to look at it. I'm just so shocked. Everything is woke these days. Let me just point that part out. Woke mind virus takes over college kids. And this is Charlie Kirk's channel. I assume he's not uploading all the thumbnails and making all the titles for these videos, but it is a rally call for the right. And okay, woke is used to describe critical race theory, queer allyship, social justice. I think all that's BS. I think it's been hijacked to mean something completely different what it meant to black people, where it came from, and now it's being used across the board, and it's a rallying cry for the right. Totally different discussion, fine. But now we're using woke to describe moral relativism. We just started describing woke stuff as this new ideology that came up a few years ago. Really, that was just an exchange for communism, basically. Like, call everybody a communist, call everybody a socialist, and now it's call everybody woke. To the point that the word means nothing anymore. If the word means everything, then it means nothing in normal language that we use every day to describe very specific things. When words begin to mean everything, they mean nothing. So if woke is, unless you just want to say that woke is everything that we disagree with, then I don't understand why you need the word woke to begin with. You can just say liberal or postmodern or progressive or whatever. But this is maybe progressive. This is moral relativism, maybe, but this is not. I don't see how we got to woke. But anyways.
But you seem to make the claim that
Do you believe that absolutely?
No.
Okay, good.
But
you're consistent.
Yeah, the big thing is for me, even if I have a God, there is no thing telling me, like, it's just like the is-ought problem, right? That's like my big contention, right? How am I ever going to derive a claim about what I should do from only statements about the nature of being?
I made this point in my last video. How do we, just because, okay, we don't get from is to ought just because something is. And this is the same point that non-religious people would make that Christians and religious people will make towards non-religious people. Like, well, science says X, Y, Z is. This is how nature is. This is how the stars do this, and this is how evolution works, whatever. All these is statements don't get us to, well, what ought we do about these things? That can only be described in philosophy and theology, but science doesn't get you there. But even within simply saying that something is wrong or right, we don't necessarily get to why I ought to do it without inserting some sort of objective value. Now the onus is on you. Now the responsibility is on you to make a subjective choice about what you want to do about what is. It still comes down to subjectivity.
Got it. So you would believe murder's wrong?
Yeah.
Why do you believe that?
Because in its definition, it says it's wrong, right? It's wrong.
I don't think people realize, and everybody in the comment section is dunking on this. This is a bad place to pause his face. They're dunking on this college student, saying, "Oh, he thinks he's so smart," but he actually is smart to call that out. He says, "So you think murder is wrong?" And he says, "Well, yeah. In the definition of murder is a moral word. It comes with moral baggage versus killing." Right, but murder is not a neutral word. So he's right to. That's like saying, do you believe that adultery is wrong? Well, adultery is a moral word versus saying, do you believe sex outside of the confines of marriage is wrong? Those are sounds like the same thing, but by describing it one way, you are already putting. And he's pretty sharp to pick that up in the moment. Shout out to the college student.
Killing of somebody, or at least that's my understanding of it.
Okay, so for example, you go to an African village, happens all the time. They leave a full-born baby by the fire. They don't want it. They discard it. Happens tons of times. Any missionary will tell you that. They just discard babies. Why? They don't believe it's wrong. It's just in their code and custom. No one feels bad about it. Just discard kids you don't want. Are they wrong?
For me, yeah, they're wrong. Yeah, it's a bullet I do have to knife.
Hold on. Are they objectively wrong? Is it objective?
No. So I don't believe in objective morality. So that can apply to any
statement. It's not objectively wrong to leave a full-born baby by the fire and just say you're on your own. Have a nice life.
Well, yeah, I'm calling into question objective morality. So I obviously have
I know. I'm just trying to make you hear back how insane what you are saying.
Well, you're making a claim about the objectivity of it.
Let's get more graphic. So you put 1,000 Jews in a gas chamber, and the Nazis thought what they were doing was good, and they pressed the button. Were they right or were they wrong in gassing millions of Jews?
Objectively, you can't
It always comes down to the Holocaust. It always. I'm not sure why, but it always gets to that point when it comes to these conversations.
You say, is it objectively wrong? Hold on, wait. If you say it's objectively wrong, you're implying that you can derive a truth value from it. And I don't think you can. So I don't think that you can.
And it's also, we have to realize that the world at large, that's why it was called a world war, fought against this. This was not something that was simply a religious duty. It was a global duty. It was a global duty that if this thing gets outside of Germany, there's no telling what havoc it can wreak on our countries. So this was a morality that was intersubjective, a word I've used before. This is a morality that as a globe, as a species of people, decided, hey, we don't want this. This is bad because for many reasons, but one of the reasons being that we don't want to see this also expressed across the world. We believe that it's locally wrong and also globally wrong. And you could very well say that it is locally wrong because it is globally wrong. And you can say those things without invoking objective moral giver. But I'm not a war history buff, so I have to learn more about all the specifics of what people stood on against the Holocaust. But it's not to say that I'm ignorant about it. I've read, and I've yet to see anything that it was some sort of religious duty, that there was some sort of Christian flag being waved, that we must stop this because of it. It was a conscience thing. It was a conscience that it was on the hearts. It was on the conscience of people across the globe. And I think when we make arguments like this, especially, and I get it because it comes from a Christian perspective, or very particular, let me not say, I don't think that's all Christians, but a particular Christian perspective, that people are just abhorrently bad. And I just don't think that's the case. I think that people can do really bad things. And at the same time, most people, psychopaths and sociopaths aside, the average person, most people, a feature that they have, that they are born with, is empathy. Now, how we stretch that empathy out beyond our family, beyond our kin, people who look like us and sound like us and are from our area, how do we extend that beyond our nation? That is something that humanity is still struggling with, because our empathy grew from evolutionary standpoint. Our empathy has grown in very, very localized spaces, and the world through over the last couple of 100 years has drastically expanded. I only say a couple hundred, let's say a couple thousand years, which is still really short compared to the lifespan of Homo sapiens. And for the longest, we've still been trying to figure out how we extend the empathy that we have grown and cultivated in local spaces and local tribes. How do we extend that beyond that? That is the task of the 21st century, for sure. It has been the task for humanity for quite a few centuries.
Can make a true statement regarding whether something's good or bad.
Got it. So just to be clear, the Nazis could have been right in their actions, in your view.
That implies that right is an actual thing. I don't believe you can determine a truth value from a moral claim.
So the Nazis were not objectively evil.
Yeah, I've said that like 4 times. Like, yeah, you can't derive objective morals.
And this is where they try to get you, though. And maybe they'll try to get me by even defending the guy. I get what the young guy is saying here. They'll try to, what they'll try to do with this to shut you down is essentially, it's I don't want to call it an ad hominem, where you basically try to attack the person's character to prove they're wrong. It's not quite that, but it sort of reeks of it in a sense, where in the moral argument, they'll try to get you to say, essentially in some weird way, like, oh, so you think the Holocaust was good? That dismisses you from or you are neutral, that the Holocaust was a neutral thing. Oh, if you thought the Holocaust was neutral, you have no conscience, you have no soul, you are dismissed from this conversation when it comes to morality. And I think that's what Charlie is trying to do here.
Statements from things. I'm not saying they're not wrong. They are wrong. Oh.
Well, no, it's okay.
Yeah.
No, I just want to make sure this is important, because what you are saying, and you're saying it very clearly, is that we look at the Holocaust and it's just a matter of opinion.
See,
Yeah, that's kind of the problem of being an atheist. You have to bite the bullet.
I admire him. He said they kind of have to bite the bullet. And I think that's what people try to do with the religious perspective and say, it will be extremely uncomfortable if we were not able to objectively call something bad, something as bad as a Holocaust. They try to use the worst thing ever, and be like, can we call that wrong? You can't. If you can't call that wrong, that is extremely uncomfortable. And it is. And I think the young guy here is saying, he said, man, yo, I don't think it's right. It's very, very uncomfortable. That doesn't make me change my entire worldview about everything else about the nature of reality. Either side, whether you're someone of faith or someone not of faith, you have to make some pretty uncomfortable conclusions. For the Christian, I think the flip side of that would be, okay, they may say to the atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God, someone who doesn't believe in objective morality, and they say, wow, you have to sit with the discomfort that you can't objectively, cosmically call something as bad as the Holocaust in some objective sense, universal sense, across space and time forever. You can't call it bad. And that is very uncomfortable. And at the same time, on the flip side, for those who are religious, a very uncomfortable thing, if you believe in a hell, is that God will damn many people, many, many more than just the Holocaust. I think it was about 6 million Jews that were tortured and murdered in the Holocaust. It will be many more than that will face much longer torture and pain and death, or whatever death looks like in an eternal sense. There's eternal life and there's eternal death. I'm not exactly sure what that means in any literal sense for the Christian, but that is also an uncomfortable. You have to sit with that. Man, I see these people in this world who are good. I think they're good. And I have to say that because God has this objective power and authority that the wages of sin is death, no matter how big or small that sin is, by simply being born into sin. If you've ever stolen anything, if it was $5 from your mother's purse, if you've ever lied about anything, if you've ever not believed fully in the God of the Bible, but in general, you were a good person, you were a law-abiding person, you were a helpful person, very benevolent, giving to other people, loving, caring, family person, friendly, stood up for the vulnerable, you stood up for those who were not cared for, you cared for the poor, you did a lot of things by the law, you'll still go to hell. Christians have to sit with, I think whatever worldview you work with, life is difficult. Life is full of a lot of gray, and life is very uncomfortable. And you have to make a lot of very uncomfortable conclusions about it. And correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section. I don't think that that's any less comfortable. And among many other things that the Christian has to wrestle with in terms of the nature of God and his relationship to humanity over the course of time. So, yeah, even like, you can bring up like, what about hundreds of years of slavery, brutal chattel slavery? And of course, those categories did not exist in a specific way that it did, in the Old Testament. And yet Christians very often use the Bible to support their slavery, to support them enslaving black people. And of course, you can say, man, well, they just read it wrong. These were evil hearts of men or whatever, but they still have the Bible and they were making objective moral claims from the Bible. And you can come in and say, well, no, it was actually wrong. You had to use your subjective sense to come in and object to what many people thought was okay, thought was right even in the eyes of God. And even if you get beyond that, you still have to deal with the fact that God sat and watched it happen. Now, again, this argument I'm making doesn't prove that God doesn't exist by any means. It doesn't prove that he doesn't exist. It doesn't prove that he's evil. To me, God sitting through slavery would not prove that he is non-existent or evil. However, it is still very uncomfortable. It's extremely uncomfortable to think, okay, this all-powerful, all-powerful, all-knowing, caring, loving God has sat through not just slavery, but many, many years of human suffering. And it doesn't seem he's done. And the only way that we can make sense of it is that he's going to make it okay in the end. Okay. Or that there's some purpose for it that we don't really understand because we're finite beings and he's an infinite being. So it's above our pay grade. Okay. That's it. And I could check your humanity. I could challenge your humanity if you were like, yeah, it sounds good to me. No problem here. No, even for the Christian who has a conscience, we'll be like, ugh, yeah. I don't know what to do with that. And I think if there's some empathy for those who, so you reckoning with that also doesn't give you reason to dismiss your entire faith, right? You still believe, but you're like, man, there's parts of it that I'm like, I don't know how to sit with that. I don't know how to marry that. I don't know. It just doesn't make me feel good. I think it's true, but I just don't like it. I just don't see how that's any different for the person who's non-religious, who believes that, man, it's very possible that we created morality. That it's not religion that predates morality, but it's morality that predates religion. People ask, well, without religion, where would we get morality? I ask, without morality, where would we get religion? If the archaeological evidence is true, we were speaking and making fiction and creating moral standards long before religion came on the scene. The same way with, I bring this up often, but our closest relatives on the primate tree, no pun intended, they have morality without God. What do you do? What do you do with that? Their morality is bent towards their own kind. So our morality sees the human as the apex, the pinnacle of things. And so anything that is done against human existence is really bad. And at the same time, though, for the chimpanzee or the bonobo, if something bad happens to humans, they're not really pressed about it. In the same way, we're not as pressed about things happening to animals. We care about animals, but it doesn't hit the same when we see violence done to humans. But the same way that we feel strongly about the value of humanity, bonobos and chimps feel the same way about each other. They have their own version of sanctity of life and morality and care for those who are vulnerable. They care for their kind that have autism, that are a little. If there's a chimpanzee that does things that is outside of the moral code, the other chimpanzees, the other primates, the other bonobos, I'm not sure if I could be confusing them. So let me always try to insert my I don't know. I'm not sure the difference. I know the difference between chimpanzee and bonobos, and sometimes I conflate the two, but one or the other. Either way, this is true, and you can look it up yourself. They will actually give preferential treatment to them. They will, in a sense, if this one chimpanzee who's a little slower than others, they give grace for it. They're like, see, normally we wouldn't let that slide, but we get that. We care. Our moral code is dynamic. It's not static. And so if they can have morality, I don't see why others can't have it we can't have it without God as well. And another thing I would point out too is, there's a verse in Romans chapter 2, verse 12, and Paul's talking about those who are not Christian, those who don't believe in Jesus. He says, for all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. Okay. And all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law. We know, this is a very popular verse, will be justified. The doers will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. So even within the Christian worldview, ironically, give space for people. You don't have to acknowledge a natural law. You say, well, if we didn't have a moral lawgiver, if we didn't acknowledge the Bible, then we would have all out war. We would have all out destruction, blah, 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 which we do with the Bible. And we have done, and Christians do it. But that aside, you could still argue, well, actually, people would still do a lot of bad things and do a lot of really good things too. There will be a lot of people doing bad things, and there will be a lot of good people fighting against the people who do bad things, just like we did with the Holocaust, because it is in their nature to do so. The only difference is that the Bible gives a theological reasoning for this sort of conscience, this law that sits on the conscience, and the material world gives an evolutionary expression of it.
I respect your intellectual clarity, and I will say,
and obviously,
hold on.
for clarity, I obviously think the Holocaust is wrong. So if anyone's questioning about
it's
that,
just
Exactly. And I guess I should say this too. I also think that it's not just wrong. It is really, really, really wrong, really bad. And we should do everything in our power to prevent it from happening again. And yet, if you also believe that genocides are wrong, no matter what side of the table you sit on when it comes to this current conflict that is happening in the Middle East, your Christian conscience has to do something with that. And yet there are people who justify, in our current times, are finding ways to be comfortable with the murder of thousands and thousands of men, women, and children, and chalking it up to wokeism and socialism and communist and anti-Americanism and yada, yada, yada. A bunch of political things that are put onto it. And it's like, you say that religion will give you conscience concerning moral things, and yet sometimes it can clear your conscience. It could make you feel okay that these bad things are happening. There have been, especially for those who are like in the what's the word I'm looking for? Dispensationalism, and think that this is all necessary for the coming of the Lord. It's crazy.
I believe that it's objectively wrong, no matter who you are or where you come from, because it transcends opinion. Do you think, last question, I appreciate your clarity on this. Do you see?
Again, but this is where this argument doesn't really hold water to me, because it's like, oh, well, you can't get account for it. But I believe that this, what did he say? Let me rewind it just a few seconds.
Do you think, last question, I appreciate your clarity on this. Do you see how your view could result in a lot of dead people?
Hold on.
Do you see how your view could result in a lot of, no matter who you are or where you come from, because it transcends opinion? Do you think, last question, I appreciate your intellectual clarity, and I will say,
and obviously, for clarity, I obviously think the Holocaust is wrong. So if anyone's questioning about that,
it's just your opinion. I believe that it's objectively wrong, no matter.
It's like I have the upper hand. It's like, well, you believe it's wrong. I believe it's objectively wrong. Okay, we're arguing about the philosophical defense or argument, philosophical, defense of good, and the philosophical judgment of bad things. But it doesn't matter if it's not practical. That's why I say, Christians can say theoretically, conceptually, they have access. Well, they don't have access. They have a concept of objective morality, but clearly you don't have full access to it. Otherwise, all Christians would be good. And some will say, well, that's because we're being sanctified. We're still learning and blah, blah, blah. But it sounds like a bunch of subjectivity to me. We got the Holy Spirit working in us, and, there's context we have to consider, and there's different perspectives and stuff. All sounds subjective to me. So there's a theory of objective values, objective morality, but in practice, it is still subjective. So I don't see how this puts you on a different plane. If we can both arrive that there's many humans across history have agreed that murder is wrong. And yet many have also found ways to justify it. Christians as well. Whether it be self-defense, or whether it be holy war, or because of someone breaking and entering, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you would also still murder. Or even murder in mass, as some have been okay with. Particularly in this country, we have been complicit in our tax dollars in mass murder.
Who you are or where you come from, because it transcends opinion. Do you think, last question, I appreciate your clarity on this, do you see how your view could result in a lot of dead people?
Well, I don't think my view is really I'm not making a claim
And your view can also do the same.
that we should behave in a way.
No, you're making claims.
Well, I am making claims, yeah, but I'm not making a claim that we should behave in a certain way, or that we ought to not have Christianity or some kind
No,
of
I'm not saying
code.
that, but let me play this out, and I think you'll
No,
understand.
I understand. You're going to say, well, there's all these bad things that could happen if people
or
follow me.
that did happen. No, I follow you. If your view becomes a view of a country, and, for example, putting 1,000 Jews in a gas chamber is not deemed as objectively wrong, transcendent above anyone's opinion, then all of a sudden, what would prevent that evil thing from occurring and nobody questioning it?
What will prevent it is the collective empathy. Again, I'm not saying humans are perfect and that we'll get everything right, and we do a lot of bad things. And yet, even with a religious perspective, it could still tip the other way. It can still tip in very mass evil. I don't see how this absolves the problem here, absolves you of the problem.
Sure. So
I can see how this, you can end up in a lot of dead people if the country as a whole has this perspective. We haven't seen it yet because most people are still religious. Most people still believe in some sort of higher power. And yet all of that is very subjective experiences and perspectives of that higher power. So it's still all subjective. But sure, nonetheless, and all those people still believe that, man, there is, even if you want to be as vague as there's an energy, the universe is saying this is wrong or this is bad, there's still that it is written on our hearts. And you can say that from a theological perspective, or you can say it from an evolutionary perspective. I don't believe that humans are all bad. I just don't. I think there's a lot of gray. I think there's a lot of opportunity for do bad things at mass levels. I think people who are given too much power do a lot of very bad things. I think capitalism has done a lot of bad things. I think colonialism, all these things, when it comes to the greed and all those things can end up doing very bad things. And oftentimes it tilts that way in the higher ups of power. And yet the average person who probably cheats on their taxes, the average person who probably does 85 and a 65, the average person who may be very subjective in their moral everyday law, man, when it comes to very serious things, tend to also do really good. That's just the way that we find it to be good because we've evolved to see it that way, if that makes sense. Empathy is intuitive. Yes, you are right, Lauren. I believe that. That's not to say that our empathy is perfect or that it's very black and white and it's very decisive, but it is there and it does show up. The person who does 85 and a 65 will also be the one who will pull over on the side of the road and help someone who has a flat tire. and they will feel great doing it. And no one would ever, it won't be on, there's some people who feel good doing it because they put it on TikTok, but there's a lot of people who do that and they'll never be seen. And it just feels good to do it. I helped somebody today.
My main idea, I guess, with the worldview is I'm not making a claim again about how things should be. I'm making a claim that this is how things are. So within my worldview, this is all fine. You can have people agreeing that things are wrong. Generally, I think most people's moral intuitions will lead them to thinking that things like murder is wrong and stealing is wrong because it makes you feel bad, right?
Well,
if I see somebody get hurt, that makes me feel bad. If you see
no,
somebody
of
die,
course,
that makes you
totally.
feel bad.
Yeah, the SS guards didn't feel bad when they killed Jews, and that's okay. But do you see where this might unravel into mass murder in society?
It's always like, but can you see how this unravels? And yet we've seen religious morality unravel in very heinous ways. And we've also still seen people do good. Most people who do good are not doing it because they feel like God is telling them to do this. Because you got to think about, okay, on the mass level, you can't call it objectively wrong. But think about on the everyday level, how people do good things. Even if you are a Christian, if you love someone that's at your church and you just help them, chances are sometimes you do it because you feel like that's what God is calling you to do. But also you do it because you've just grown close to them and you really genuinely just care about people. You just want to do good by people. It's not always a conscious decision that like God is telling me to help this. It's just kind of part of your nature to do that. So we only really need the religion to really kick in when it starts being extended beyond our localized environment. That's where it gets tricky. I will admit that's where it gets really gray when you're trying to extend that empathy beyond what we've normally or evolutionarily been able to do. We did not evolve as a global society of 8 billion people who have access to nuclear weapons.
Chaos.
Yeah, that happens in the real world. I'm making a description about the way people derive their morals. I'm not saying how we should or shouldn't. I'm saying this is how you derive your morals. If you have two books there, the trueness or correspondence with reality has anything to do with your preference towards one moral system or another.
Hold on. Or maybe the true one says, don't gas the Jews.
That
and
would be,
don't
yeah,
murder.
that would be obviously
because God will judge you harshly.
Yeah, 100%.
Maybe the true.
It's not even because God will judge you harshly, because it's wrong. That's the thing. Like, it shouldn't be an eternal judgment tied to it. It's wrong because it's wrong right now. Today, it is wrong. Not because it's wrong in eternity. Not because it's wrong when Jesus comes back. It's not because it's wrong thousands of years from now. It's wrong today. It's just wrong right now.
Just hear me out. Maybe the true one says that life is good and that there is a creator who loves you.
But
maybe,
now what you're doing is you're just making claims about what you think. Like, yeah, obviously it would be awesome if I had a moral code that everyone had to follow that agreed.
I know if only a book existed.
Yes, it would be convenient. He's like, only if a book. Like, it would be convenient if we had a moral code to say this is what. Yes, it would be very convenient for that.
I know, if only. But my
if
entire
only
point
there
is
was
that
this
all the
amazing
things
book.
Yeah, but my point is that
No,
all the
you're
things
being super clear. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
yeah.
No, and you're the first person ever, to your credit, to answer the atheist Nazi question clearly, which is that an atheist cannot objectively say that the Holocaust.
Please, someone, I just don't get the power of this argument. It's like, that's the sort of presuppositional approach. It's like, can you account for it being good or evil? Well, I can, so I win. It's in my book. My book says it's. Well, we haven't even talked about whether or not the book is actually true and how the book came to arrive to understand that what you're saying is wrong is wrong. Where did the morality of the Bible come from? Well, it came from God. Let's talk about that. But just because you say you have the book from God that says it's wrong doesn't end the conversation. I'm getting very passionate about this, but it's criticisms to think about.
Wrong.
I'm arguing against objective, like the idea that.
No, you're being. Usually there's some withering there. You went right into there.
Well, yeah, I can't go in here and not bite the bullets of what my argument implies.
We have clarity but not agreement. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for your time.
And there we have it. We have clarity but not agreement. So, I think I've made my points about that in general, about the moral. I've talked about this a bit. I've made a video about this before, and I think I've tried to bring out my main points in this video in an interactive way. I'll take about, let's say, 10 minutes to answer some questions. Y'all can chime in, and then I'll hop off. I'm gonna try to keep this under an hour. So please let me run through some of these. Let's see. Okay. As a Christian, I think the concern of people being naturally good or evil is a false dichotomy. As I understand, we are a mixed bag that reflects God's good and human corruption simultaneously. Or hear me out. Another perspective that I just thought of just now is that even God's morality is subjective. And if you're made in the image of God, ergo, like I think that people, and I think the Christian has to acknowledge this as well, is that it's like, well, objective morality, as if objective morality exists outside of God. Because it kind of has to. It's its own entity that God has created. Think about that. Because God himself doesn't have objective morality. God does what he wants to. And morality, and anything he does is good because he is good. Does good exist because of God, or good exist within God? Another conversation. But he can do whatever he wants. So if he wants to wipe out the Canaanites, if he wants to exact his justice through a particular group of people and say, kill all these women and children, leave nothing behind, then it's okay because they were doing evil, and it's justified because God knows what is best. But for the actual human who wants to do that for their own human reasons, they're wrong. So murder is not objectively wrong for God. It is subjectively good or evil. If God wants to knock somebody down because he created them, he can. So morality is subjective for God. Does that make sense? Because God is holy, whatever he does, it must be good. So if he allows someone to live, it's good. If he smites them for not paying their tithes and offering, then it's also good. So where is the objective morality? Lauren says, nobody wants to discuss the possibility that even if the Bible's authors were hearing from God, they were human and imperfect and had their own biases. I'm totally open to that. I am totally open to the idea that the Bible, the collection of books, the Bible is not one book. It is a library of books across genres and perspectives of people who may have came from the same general area, but had very different contexts for when they were writing and how they were understanding their own history and how they were understanding and hoping for their own future. And each of those contexts come with their own biases. I am totally open, which is probably the only way I'd be open to, and that's how I read the Bible now, at least, is seeing this wealth of wisdom of people who got it really wrong and may have got some things right, and it's very possible that they were being guided by and led by God, and they're imperfect and they're adding in and somehow you sort of get a general gist of good if you read it, but also it's like, man, I can see a lot of bad in that because humans are humans. Can one have empathy? Ashley asks, can one have empathy without morality? I do believe there can be morality without a religious or specifically Christian base. Oh, absolutely. Well, people are moral already. The point of the Christian apologist is that you don't have any basis for your morality. You don't have any philosophical foundation for your morality, but they will never argue that you can't be moral. The Bible even argues that people who don't believe in God are moral, or don't believe in the Christian God are moral. Muslims, very moral people. Buddhists, very moral. Jews, very moral. The list goes on. Hindus, very moral people. And that's another side point, is that the same argument that the Christian makes, other religious texts can make, well, our God says that it's wrong too. So what's so special about yours? But you said, can one have empathy without morality? I think empathy leads to morality. Morality is empathy in a group context. Or should I say, morality is empathy lived out. is empathy expressed, or as Cornel West would say, justice is what love looks like in public. I like that line. Justice is what love looks like in public. And I think that's what morality, empathy is expressed through morality. We have moral codes because we care about other people. And it's not simply that we care about other people so that we can care about ourselves. In that, I think altruism could be a real thing. I used to question that for a long time and think that people just do good things so they can be boosted in the group, or they can prevent themselves from being cast out of the group. This is why I will tell the truth. This is why I'll be a virtuous person, so I can say. But I think the case can be made that people just are intrinsically empathetic. Children are, before they know anything about God or understand anything about some moral argument, they are deeply empathetic beings. Not the best at it, because they are also, really bad, right? Like, kids can also be very extremely selfish, the exact opposite of empathetic, but it's there. And it's the job of the adults to shape that empathy and guide it in the right direction. But it's there, though, intrinsically. Stephen says, do you think it is possible that he is tied to the ought, and it's just that it takes reason to work it out? And you be asking some tough questions on here, Stephen. Now, sometimes I feel like I don't be understanding. Let me just say this too, man. I be coming to this as passionately as I'm talking. I understand it. Like, man, I want to learn from y'all as well, man. The comments that I see in here, the stuff y'all be saying, I be like, and not just in the live, but even on my comment section, I be like, oh, this. I know I don't know it all. Obviously I know that just from watching and reading, and the more I learn from others in book and video context. But then, there are people out there who don't have some massive YouTube channel, and just because they don't have a podcast microphone, doesn't mean that they are not well read and really well thought out. And I see that in my comment section. It could be argued that if you do have a podcast microphone and a nice camera, you shouldn't be talking, because that's what it seems like these days. It's like, man, that should be reason to question your intelligence and empathy, because, man, people are wild. But yeah, I really appreciate the questions that y'all ask. We aren't holy, but God is. Juxtaposed to him, we are considered evil. Yes, that is a Christian perspective. And yet, even that feels to me, feels a bit arbitrary. And I'm just putting on my atheist strongman hat today. I'm not an atheist. I am open to supernatural. I am open to, when I say open to the concept, the idea, the future of that being an experience. And I think there are good cases for me to consider why someone should strongly consider and inquire faith. And yet I think there's also strong argument on the other side as well. Sometimes stronger, that it things can tend to make more sense, but making rational sense is not always doesn't have to be the end goal, I guess. So I'm cool with that too. But in this sense, yeah, it's like we aren't holy, but God is juxtaposed to him, we are evil. And it's like, well, okay, cool, because God said so. But even with that, you can't say that God is holy because he's holy. It's sort of a circular reasoning within that. It's like, well, why is he holy? Is he holy because he does good things in our eyes? No, he does good things within himself. He makes good decisions within himself. Well, how does he judge if those are good decisions? Because he's holy. Okay, well, we never really get outside. And I could be okay with that. Like, at some point, I think all things may eventually have to whittle down to some sort of circular reasoning, or some sense of I don't know how this adds up. Like, if you keep seeing through everything, eventually you have to come to the conclusion that I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, sure. It doesn't quite make sense, but I can't make sense of everything else without this thing being a priori. So I'm okay with that. I'm just saying that you also cannot, it must be said also then that God doesn't have objective morality. He has his objective authority, which is not the same as objective morality. Yeah. Does that make sense? And that maybe a new word that I keep trying to insert into this conversation is intersubjective, and that maybe morality is neither subjective or objective, but something that emerges out of the intersubjective experience of multiple people. We see this play out even in churches. You may have objective morality, but try to have objective rule in your own church, objective standard in your own church. There's disagreements on how these things can be played out, X, Y, Z. People leave the church, people come in and people get excommunicated. There's strong disagreements, churches split. There's no objective morality. There are disagreements about what objective morality is, but you never, in a practical sense, you don't get to it. No one ever does get to it. It still stays theoretical. You never actually access objective morality. And that's okay, because on the other side, outside of the Bible, you don't get objective morality either. It's a sort of intersubjective thing. It is a thing that emerges out of the cooperation of people. And it could be that morality for the human, even for the Christian, emerges out of the cooperation and relationship to God. But it's not necessarily this sort of objective, static thing. It is very dynamic. I think maybe that's what's confusing me too. I think sometimes when I hear the word objective, I equate it to, and maybe wrongly, I equate it to static. That this is always the case. It will always, as Charlie Kirk says in that video we just watched. It's like throughout all time in the universe, it's wrong. It's like it's static, but morality is not static. It's dynamic throughout the generations, throughout people, throughout cultures, throughout relationship between one individual to God and the other. That's what Jesus is like, man, what is it to you if he sticks around with me? You follow me. Don't worry about what he doing. You worry about you, and I'll worry about him. And is subjective morality dangerous to some degree? Yes. That doesn't make it untruthful. It just makes it, really gray and really uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. All right, last couple ones and I gotta go. It says, Daniel says he has both objective authority and objective morality, a standard for all to live according to. He creates objective morality. But even then, morality is different for every, is polygamy right or wrong? In certain cases, it is. In certain cases, it's not. Is murder right or wrong? Is genocide right or wrong? Well, when the Jews did it, it was okay because it was God working through them to do it. And I'm not talking about the Jews today. Let me go ahead and clarify before I cause any political stuff. I'm talking about in the Old Testament, they wiped out, they had divine commandment to wipe out women and children, not just soldiers. And it is okay because God told them to do it. And if someone was to try to replicate that today, would it be wrong? You would say yes, but it was not wrong then because of the context. That sounds like subjective morality to me. Am I wrong for it sounds like objective morality to me. Well, anyways, I'm gonna try to wrap this thing up. We're a little over an hour. Thanks for interacting with me. I'm gonna try to be more regular on this. I think I'm gonna start trying to do live streams on Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I've kind of been all over the place, but I think more people would show up if they knew when to expect it, and we'll try to start a rhythm going. I'm not gonna try to overcommit just yet, so maybe we'll just start with Monday and Wednesdays or something like that. I'll figure it out over the weekend and make an announcement, and we'd love to have y'all chime in. And I've been enjoying these. I've been really enjoying these, and the quality. I'm trying to get better and better. And guess what, y'all? Guess what? Your boy got a theme song for the live now. It's been been real. Love y'all.
Flights and Phoenix Airlines Flight 1 with nonstop service from Chicago to Atlanta. My name is Joseph. I will be your flight attendant, assisted by our Atlanta-based cabin crew. We ask that you please fasten your seatbelts and secure